Picture this, a woman so powerful that she made Roman generals abandon their armies, so intelligent that she spoke 9 languages fluently, and so ambitious that she nearly conquered the greatest empire the world had ever known. This is not a fairy tale. This is the real story of Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, whose life reads like the most incredible thriller ever written. But here's what history books won't tell you: Cleopatra wasn't just beautiful. She was a master strategist who turned her bedroom into a boardroom, her lovers into allies, and her enemies into the architects of their own downfall. Her story isn't just about ancient Egypt, it's about power, ambition, and what happens when an unstoppable force meets the immovable object of Roman imperialism. Get ready to discover the woman who seduced 2 of Rome's most powerful men, commanded navies in epic sea battles, and chose death over defeat. This is Cleopatra as you've never heard her story before, raw, real, and absolutely riveting. The making of a queen, born to rule. In the scorching summer of 69 BCE, as the Mediterranean sun blazed over Alexandria, a child was born who would reshape the ancient world. Cleopatra VII Philopator entered the world not as an Egyptian, but as a member of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Greek conquerors who had ruled Egypt for 3 centuries without ever bothering to learn the local language. But Cleopatra would be different. Dramatically different. Her father, Ptolemy XII, was nicknamed Auletes, the flute player, because Romans mocked him for his love of music rather than warfare. He was weak, unpopular, and constantly begging Rome for protection. Young Cleopatra watched her father humiliate himself before Roman senators, and she swore she would never bow to anyone. The royal palace in Alexandria was a world unto itself, marble corridors lined with golden statues, libraries containing the wisdom of centuries, and gardens that stretched to the harbor where the legendary lighthouse guided ships from across the known world. But beneath the luxury lay deadly currents of palace intrigue. Cleopatra's education was unlike anything available to women of her era. While other princesses learned to embroider and play music, Cleopatra studied mathematics, philosophy, rhetoric, and languages. By age 12, she was fluent in Greek, Latin, Egyptian, Hebrew, Arabic, Ethiopian, and several other tongues. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years who could actually speak to her Egyptian subjects in their native language. More importantly, she learned to think like a pharaoh. Egypt wasn't just a country to her, it was a sacred trust passed down from the gods themselves. She studied the great pharaohs of the past and decided she would surpass them all. When political enemies forced her father to flee Egypt, teenage Cleopatra experienced her first taste of powerlessness. The experience taught her a crucial lesson: in the ancient world, only the strong survived. Everything else, beauty, intelligence, royal bloodline, meant nothing without power. By the time Ptolemy XII reclaimed his throne with Roman military support, Cleopatra had transformed from a privileged princess into a calculating political strategist. She understood that Egypt's survival depended on successfully managing the rising power of Rome. But where her father chose submission, Cleopatra would choose seduction. The carpet gambit, a throne won through audacity. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BCE, 18-year-old Cleopatra inherited a kingdom in crisis. According to Egyptian law, she had to share the throne with her 10-year-old brother Ptolemy XIII. But Cleopatra had no intention of being a figurehead while advisors ruled in her brother's name. The power struggle began immediately. Ptolemy XIII's advisors moved to sideline Cleopatra completely. They controlled the army, the treasury, and most importantly, they had the ear of her young brother. Within months, Cleopatra found herself fighting for her life. The breaking point came when Cleopatra tried to assert her authority as senior ruler. Her brother's advisors accused her of attempting murder and convinced the royal council to issue a decree: Cleopatra VII was no longer pharaoh of Egypt. Palace guards surrounded her chambers with orders to arrest or kill the deposed queen. But Cleopatra hadn't spent years studying history's greatest rulers only to surrender at the first sign of trouble. That night, she disguised herself as a servant and slipped out of Alexandria with a handful of loyal followers. As the sun rose over the delta, Egypt's rightful pharaoh had become a fugitive in her own kingdom. For months, Cleopatra lived in the eastern desert, gathering supporters among Bedouin tribes and Egyptian nobles who remained loyal to her cause. The pampered princess was becoming a warrior queen. Meanwhile, fate delivered an unexpected opportunity. Julius Caesar, Rome's most powerful general, arrived in Alexandria pursuing his rival Pompey the Great. Caesar needed Egyptian support and expected to arbitrate the dispute between the royal siblings. But Cleopatra knew that whoever met Caesar first would gain the advantage. Cleopatra devised one of history's most audacious political stunts. She had her loyal servant wrap her in a linen sheet and carry her into Caesar's quarters as laundry. When Caesar untied the bundle, out stepped the rightful queen of Egypt, young, beautiful, and radiating the confidence of someone who had already outmaneuvered her enemies. Caesar was 52 years old, battle-scarred, and utterly cynical about political seduction attempts. But he had never met anyone like Cleopatra. She didn't weep or beg. Instead, she spoke to him as an equal, one ruler to another, explaining her vision for Egypt's future and Rome's place in it. More importantly, she spoke to him in perfect Latin, demonstrating a keen understanding of Roman politics and military strategy. This wasn't some desperate princess offering herself as a prize. This was a fellow strategist proposing an alliance between equals. Caesar agreed to support Cleopatra's claim, but her brother's advisors declared war on Caesar's small force. What followed was the Alexandrine War, a brutal urban conflict that raged through the city's streets for months. By the time Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile during the final battle, Cleopatra had proven herself as both queen and warrior. The power behind the throne, love and politics in ancient Rome. Caesar's victory made Cleopatra undisputed pharaoh of Egypt, but it also made her something far more dangerous, a woman with the ear of Rome's most powerful man. Their relationship began as political calculation and evolved into something much deeper and more complex. Cleopatra understood something that escaped most ancient rulers: true power came not from commanding armies, but from controlling those who commanded armies. Caesar needed Egypt's wealth to fund his political ambitions in Rome. Cleopatra needed Rome's military protection to secure her throne. Together, they sailed up the Nile in a floating palace, reviewing Egypt's agricultural wealth and discussing plans for the future. Caesar saw that Egypt wasn't the declining kingdom Roman propaganda portrayed, but a sophisticated civilization with advanced engineering, mathematics, and medicine. In 47 BCE, Cleopatra gave birth to Caesar Ion, Little Caesar. Whether Caesar was actually the father remains historically unclear, but Cleopatra claimed him as such, and Caesar never denied paternity. The child represented something revolutionary: the potential unification of Rome's military power with Egypt's ancient legitimacy and vast wealth. When she followed Caesar to Rome in 46 BCE, the reception was ice-cold. Roman matrons were appalled by a foreign queen who acted as Caesar's equal in public. Her lifestyle in Rome was deliberately provocative, living in a villa across the Tiber, surrounded by Egyptian servants and exotic animals that showcased her kingdom's wealth. The arrangement worked perfectly until March 15, 44 BCE, the Ides of March. When Roman senators assassinated Caesar, they didn't just kill Cleopatra's lover, they destroyed her carefully constructed political strategy. Without Caesar's protection, she became a target for every Roman politician who wanted to prove their independence. Cleopatra fled Rome immediately, taking Caesar Ion and as much treasure as she could transport. Back in Egypt, she faced her greatest challenge yet. Caesar's death had created a power vacuum that threatened to drag the entire Mediterranean world into civil war. The meeting at Tarsus, seduction as statecraft. After Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra faced a critical decision. The Roman world was splitting between rival claimants to Caesar's legacy, and Egypt needed a powerful protector. Mark Antony controlled Rome's eastern territories and commanded loyalty among Caesar's veterans. In 41 BCE, Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus. Ostensibly, he wanted to discuss Egypt's role in his planned campaign against the Parthian Empire. But Cleopatra recognized this summons as an opportunity to secure Egypt's future through seduction. What happened next became one of history's most famous displays of political theater. Cleopatra's ship was a floating work of art, gilt-covered stern, purple sails, silver oars that kept time to music. Cleopatra herself appeared dressed as Aphrodite, goddess of love, surrounded by servants costumed as cupids and sea nymphs. The entire population of Tarsus lined the banks to witness this incredible spectacle. But the real performance began when she met Antony face to face. Where other rulers would have prostrated themselves before Rome's representative, Cleopatra maintained the dignity of an independent sovereign. Antony was 42 years old, a veteran of countless military campaigns who had seen every form of political intrigue. But he had never encountered anyone like Cleopatra. She was 28, at the height of her powers, and absolutely confident in her ability to bend the Roman general to her will. The seduction worked perfectly. Within days, Antony was completely captivated. He abandoned his planned military campaigns and followed Cleopatra back to Alexandria, where she introduced him to a lifestyle of luxury beyond anything Rome could offer. Their relationship was never just about pleasure. Cleopatra and Antony spent hours discussing strategy for their mutual benefit. Egypt would provide the wealth and resources Antony needed for his military campaigns. In return, Rome would guarantee Egypt's independence and security. Their partnership produced 3 children: Alexander Helios, the sun; Cleopatra Selene, the moon; and Ptolemy Philadelphus. The names were carefully chosen to emphasize the cosmic significance of their union, the joining of Roman military might with Egyptian divine authority. However, their alliance created problems in Rome. Antony was already married to Octavia, Octavian's sister, as part of a political arrangement. His open relationship with Cleopatra was not just adultery, it was a public insult to Octavian and a sign that Antony might be placing Egyptian interests above Roman ones. The donations of Alexandria, a dream of empire. In 34 BCE, Cleopatra and Antony staged an event that would seal their fate and trigger the final war that would determine the future of the Mediterranean world. The donations of Alexandria was intended as a celebration of their partnership. Instead, it gave Octavian the excuse he needed to destroy them both. The ceremony took place in Alexandria's great gymnasium before thousands. Cleopatra appeared in the sacred robes of the goddess Isis, while Antony wore the costume of Dionysus. Together, they announced a new division of the Eastern world that would create a vast empire stretching from Egypt to Armenia. Caesar Ion was proclaimed King of Kings, and legitimate heir to Julius Caesar's legacy, a direct challenge to Octavian's position. Their children received vast territories across the east. Cleopatra herself was confirmed as Queen of Egypt and Cyprus. But to Roman eyes, the donations looked like treason. Antony appeared to be giving away Roman territory to his foreign mistress and their children. Octavian seized on this as proof that Antony had been corrupted by Egyptian decadence. Octavian's propaganda machine painted Cleopatra as a new Helen of Troy, a dangerous woman whose beauty had driven men to betray their homeland. When Octavian claimed to have obtained Antony's will and read it publicly, revealing that Antony wanted to be buried in Alexandria rather than Rome, Roman opinion turned completely against both lovers. By 32 BCE, the relationship between Octavian and Antony had deteriorated beyond repair. Octavian convinced the Roman Senate to declare war, not against Antony, which would have been civil war, but against Cleopatra as a foreign enemy. The Battle of Actium, When Dreams Die at Sea. September 2, 31 BCE. The waters off the Greek coast at Actium witnessed one of history's most decisive naval battles. Antony commanded over 500 ships and 70,000 men, while Cleopatra brought 60 Egyptian vessels loaded with treasure. Their strategy was bold but risky: break through Octavian's naval blockade and escape to Egypt. Octavian's admiral, Marcus Agrippa, commanded 400 ships that were smaller but more maneuverable. More importantly, Octavian had spent months cutting off Antony's supply lines, leaving his enemy's forces hungry and demoralized. The battle began at dawn with both fleets forming lines of battle. For hours, the outcome remained uncertain as ramming attacks and boarding parties turned the sea red with blood. Then Cleopatra made the decision that would define her legacy forever. Seeing that the battle was turning against them, she ordered her ships to break through the Roman line and escape to open water. Antony, believing Cleopatra was abandoning him, followed her ships with a small squadron. The sight of their commanders fleeing shattered the morale of the remaining fleet. Ship after ship surrendered to Octavian's forces, and by evening, Antony and Cleopatra's naval power had been completely destroyed. Back in Alexandria, they attempted to rally their remaining forces for a final stand, but their defeat at Actium had shattered their credibility. No one wanted to join a losing cause. As Octavian's armies approached Alexandria in 30 BCE, Cleopatra retreated to her mausoleum with her most trusted servants. The Serpent's Kiss, a queen's final choice. July 30, 30 BCE. In a magnificent tomb she had prepared for herself in Alexandria, Cleopatra VII faced her final decision. Octavian's forces had entered the city, Antony was dead by his own hand, and the last pharaoh of Egypt had run out of political options. The details of Antony's death reveal the tragic collapse of their great love story. Believing false reports that Cleopatra had already committed suicide, he fell on his sword in the Roman tradition. When his servants carried him, dying, to Cleopatra's hiding place, she pulled him up to her window with ropes. She couldn't open the mausoleum doors for fear of capture, but she wouldn't let him die alone. After Antony's death, Cleopatra attempted one final diplomatic maneuver. She agreed to meet with Octavian, hoping to secure favorable terms for her children, but she quickly realized that Octavian intended to keep her alive as a trophy for his triumph in Rome. She had always known this moment might come. For years, she had studied the deaths of great rulers, looking for examples of how to die with dignity when all else was lost. On her final day, Cleopatra dressed in her royal regalia and arranged herself on a golden couch surrounded by the treasures of Egypt. The method of her suicide remains one of history's great mysteries. Ancient sources claim she was bitten by an asp, a small venomous snake that was sacred to Egyptian pharaohs. Modern historians debate whether this is possible, but the method matters less than the meaning. Cleopatra chose death over defeat, dignity over survival, legend over life. She denied Octavian his greatest prize and ensured that history would remember her as a pharaoh who never surrendered. When Octavian's soldiers found her body, she was peaceful, beautiful, and utterly beyond his reach. The immortal legacy, how a pharaoh became forever. Octavian found Cleopatra exactly as she had planned, dead, dignified, and dressed as the pharaoh of Egypt. The immediate aftermath was swift and brutal. Caesar Ion was hunted down and executed. Egypt became a Roman province, its vast wealth flowing directly to Rome. But Octavian discovered that dead enemies could be more dangerous than living ones. Cleopatra's story began to grow in the telling, transforming from a tale of political failure into an immortal legend of love, ambition, and tragic grandeur. The story of Cleopatra and Antony became the template for literature's greatest tragic love stories. Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra portrayed them as lovers whose passion was so great it threatened to topple empires. Hollywood films turned her into the ultimate femme fatale, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. But the historical Cleopatra was far more complex. She was the last pharaoh of the world's oldest civilization, a polyglot who could speak to different peoples in their native tongues. She was a mathematician who understood engineering, a philosopher who debated with great minds, and a strategist who nearly succeeded in creating an alternative to Roman imperialism. Most importantly, she was a woman who refused to accept the limitations her gender and era tried to impose. In a world where women were expected to be silent and submissive, Cleopatra commanded armies and negotiated with emperors. In an age when foreign rulers were expected to bow before Roman power, she insisted on equality and independence. Her reign marked the end of the Hellenistic period, the final chapter in the story that began when Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire. With her death, the last remnant of Alexander's legacy disappeared, and the Mediterranean world became completely Roman. Yet Cleopatra's influence extended far beyond her own era. Today, she remains one of history's most recognizable figures, her name synonymous with beauty, intelligence, and tragic grandeur. Her story offers timeless lessons about power, ambition, and the price of greatness. Cleopatra understood that knowledge is power, demonstrated that successful leadership requires adaptability, and showed that even defeat can be transformed into victory through the power of narrative. Most importantly, her life reminds us that individual actions can shape the course of civilization. She was born at a pivotal moment when the old world was dying and the new world was being born. She fought desperately to preserve Egyptian independence, but the tide of history was against her. Yet even in failure, Cleopatra achieved a form of immortality that eluded most successful rulers. The last pharaoh of Egypt died more than 2,000 years ago, but her legend lives on. In every woman who refuses to accept limitations, in every leader who chooses principle over compromise, in every person who dares to dream of changing the world, something of Cleopatra's spirit survives. In the end, Octavian conquered Egypt, but Cleopatra conquered eternity. And in the court of human memory, the last pharaoh still reigns supreme. The eternal queen, the endless legacy of a legend. And so it ends, the story of perhaps the world's greatest female leader. But it never really ended, did it? Cleopatra's story reminds us that true power lies not in thrones or armies, but in the ability to touch people's hearts and imaginations. She was not just a queen, she was a visionary who pushed the boundaries of what was possible, thought beyond her time, and left an indelible mark that will be remembered forever. Even today, 2,000 years later, we still feel that same magical effect when we hear Cleopatra's name. Because she was not just the last pharaoh of Egypt, she was a symbol of courage, intelligence, and determination. She was a woman who wrote her own rules in a man's world, turned defeat into victory, and even turned death into her own choice. Cleopatra's legacy lives on in this truth: sometimes the greatest victories are hidden even in the battles we cannot win. She may have lost her empire, but she gained eternity. And this is one of the most beautiful revenge stories ever written in history. Every time we strive to achieve the impossible, raise our voices, and dare to dream, that is when Cleopatra's spirit continues to live among us. Let my final words be this: Cleopatra taught us that the true crown is not the one we wear on our heads, but the trail we leave behind. And that trail never fades.